The fourth and final session of the 2022 Ohio State University Extension Beef Team's virtual beef school was hosted via Zoom on April 11th. Following a format different from beef school sessions in the past, the entire evening was spent discussing and responding to questions that were asked by the listeners. Topics of discussion throughout the evening included mineral programs for the cow herd, concerns regarding vaccinations for breeding bulls, regenerative grazing concepts that include calves naturally weaning themselves, the economics of beginning a cow-calf operation today, concerns getting young and beginning farmers involved in the industry, diagnosing calving and early calf health issues, effectively utilizing EPDs in times of high feed costs, the impact of nutrition on calving issues, considerations for fall calving herds, the value of chelated minerals, the relationship between feet and leg issues and muddy conditions, and the planned and also potential upcoming beef cattle programs. Throughout the evening, OSU beef field specialist Garth Ruff moderates the questions and answers.
Thanks for joining us again as we kind of wrap up our winter meeting season, if you will. The gist of tonight's a little bit different than what we've done in the past. Typically, we come up with a topic and a presentation and go through that and answer questions after the fact. Tonight, that's all we're going to do. We're going to answer questions that you folks might have. We'll start with some questions that we had before tonight. As we go along, if you have questions, either type those into that question and answer box, Q&A box, or raise your hand, and I do have the ability to unmute you, whatever's easier on your guys' end. So logged on tonight, you can kind of see that, the motley crew we have here, if you will. Stan Smith, Fairfield County, Ted, Dean, Steve. We'll kind of go around the horn and address some of the questions that were asked ahead of time. We'll start there. All right, I think we'll start with one for Dr. Boyles. What is the best way to create a custom mineral mix? What critical vitamins should be blended with minerals during early spring grazing?
Well, certainly think about, having elevated levels of magnesium for possible grass. That could be, if I'm going to increase the magnesium level, I'd probably also incorporate 10 to 15% of a grain or molasses, something to make sure the animals consume it. But also, I think mag oxide, there's different sources of magnesium, but I don't know that their taste is particularly attractive. So any sort of grass tetany mineral that has elevated levels of magnesium, I'm going to incorporate soybean meal or something like that with the mineral. The vitamin mix can be pretty basic. I can't recall my numbers, but typically my minimum baseline for copper is 1,000 parts per million. And you can go up from there. I've seen mixes that are higher than that, but probably minimum on that copper of about 1,000 parts per million. Well, we used to feed a lot more phosphorus than we do today in our mineral mixes, but that could be as low as 6, maybe 7 or 8. I remember we used to talk about 12 and 14, but I think we've determined we can get away with less phosphorus. It's very, it was expensive before we had $4 a gallon gas, and I'm sure it's even worse now. So maybe certainly a forage analysis would sure help out in a lot of these situations. Even whenever you look at magnesium, you also have to look at some other minerals that interfere with its absorption. So if you can have some of that forage analysis done. I'm not sure I've answered all those questions, Garth. If somebody wanted to talk to me at another point, I don't have all those numbers for a mineral mix in my mind that I have for a basic mineral. Also, if you're mixing your own minerals, vitamins don't stand up to minerals real long. So probably if it's a homemade mix, every 2 to 3 weeks versus, well, I'm going to mix up enough mineral for 6 months. That's going to degrade on those vitamins. So keep that in mind. They put some antioxidants in some of those commercial mixes, but even then, I don't want to get something that has a fancy label on it. You know, Steve Boyle's special mix that's sold at a store that's 3 months old. I don't know. I'm looking kind of like when I look at milk in the grocery store. I like that stuff that has a longer date on it.
Thanks, Steve. I put a link in the chat to a fact sheet from Missouri on vitamins for beef cattle.
There's also, we have a fact sheet, minerals and interactions at the Beef Team website.
Yep. We'll open this up to the group. Can I effectively vaccinate bulls the same day we do breeding soundness exams? Dean, any thoughts?
I don't think it should be too big of an issue. They're going to be under a little bit of stress doing that, but it's not an overly stressful thing. Otherwise, you're going to be running them back through the chute anyhow and putting them through the stress then. So maybe somebody else thinks different than me, but I think you'd be okay doing that.
I'd just make sure they work with their vet on that as to what they're doing and giving them to them to, as far as stressing them on that if we're going to be running them through. So,
Yep. Certainly work with your veterinarians. Thinking a program in Adams County, Dr. Kiefer mentioned you don't want to give a vaccine right before your BSE, in case those bulls have an immune response that could affect semen quality. I had a question about the last webinar, kind of come in late here. It was about the boluses for calf scours, trying to clarify something that Dr. Kiefer said, as far as if they're only effective for a week or a limited period of time. Thinking those E. coli boluses where that week time frame comes in, you know, there's several things that cause calf scours. And most commonly, E. coli is going to be in that first 7 to 10 days. So if we're going to use those boluses to prevent E. coli scours, I think we want to give it in the first week of life versus how long it actually works in the calf. The next question we had ahead of time, a little bit different lines of things. Has anyone successfully practiced regenerative adaptive grazing using only one herd, letting cows wean their babies in the pasture? Stan, any thoughts?
I don't know of anybody personally that's been successful at that on a large scale or did it on purpose. Not sure that I see the value in even trying to do it, other than it just reduces the number of groups that you've got to manage. But if you're grazing calves, my guess is you're trying to optimize performance there. And with regard to the cows, they perhaps don't need as much quality as the calves do. So I would find a way to separate the calves, perhaps graze them one notch in front of the cows and let them have the best stuff, let them top it off and let the cows come along and clean it up once they're weaned and their nutritional requirements aren't that great. But I personally do not know of anyone that here in the state that plans to do it that way.
Yeah, I think that becomes tricky even from a reproduction standpoint, right? You know, we've probably all seen the neighbor may not have a breeding season or forgot to wean a couple calves, right? And we've all seen that proverbial 3-in-1 or 4-in-1 package, right? The cow's got 2 calves nursing because either we didn't wean that calf or didn't pull that bull. I think that becomes certainly a challenge for that cow, keeping her in good shape.
I think it's also a concern that if you're working that way and keeping them all in one group, unless you sort that bull out, when those calves are big enough to wean themselves, those heifer calves at 10 to 12 months old may be cycling, and you may get them bred a lot earlier than you want to and run into some real problems there.
The next question I think is pretty interesting in terms of timing and economics in the grand scheme of things at this point in time. Do you believe that starting a commercial beef operation from scratch in the year 2022 is a profitable business endeavor for investment? A lot of things go into that.
Garth, I'd be happy to kick that one off. We get that question a lot over the years. Should I start? When do I start? And everybody, no, the majority of those questions come in when prices are really strong. And a long, long time ago, Steve Boyles will remember this, we had Harlan Hughes come in and do a program for us. And he talked about letting the cost of replacements determine when you build up breeding stock. And he talked about isolating an amount of money or a percentage of your income, estimated income every year for replacement stock. And when cows, bred cows, replacement heifers, whatever, are very expensive, obviously you buy less of them with that amount of money. And when they get less expensive, you can buy more of them. And to be on the profitable side of the cycle that we've all come to know and love in beef cattle marketing, we need to be buying when they're less expensive, because when they're in full production, that's when we would expect the value of the calves and their offspring to be at its greatest. So right now, perhaps at the peak of the cycle or approaching the peak, unless you've got grass going to waste, it's probably not the time to be putting together a cow herd. By the time those cows are producing at their optimum, we would expect that the value of calves is going to regress a little bit. Right now, we don't have enough numbers of cows in the country, probably to satisfy the demand. So they're going to be expensive to purchase replacements. The only exception to that might be is if you own grass and you're either not getting compensated in your mind correctly for it from a tenant or a renter, or you need to market that grass. And then it becomes a conversation between, do I put in stockers or do I put in cows? And either one's going to be expensive right now. And quite frankly, if you're looking at owning grass that's not got cows or calves or something planned for it this summer, and you had to go out and buy grass calves for it right now, you're probably going to pay too much for them. And as we talk to folks about the idea of running stockers, for those that don't have the experience, their idea is, well, I'll go buy them when the grass is ready to graze, I turn them out. And what usually happens is the grass begins to run out in a hot, dry August, and they keep those calves too long. They don't perform that last month or 6 weeks. And quite frankly, between the drift on the price per pound that they paid in the spring versus what they'll get in the fall, and the reduced performance because we didn't find supplemental feed when the grass dried up, the inexperienced stalker doesn't do all that great. Those calves probably needed to be laid in a while ago if you're going to graze them. So traditional thinking would tell you now's not the hot time to be putting together a commercial cow herd. But if you got grass going to waste and you can find a herd dispersal of some quality cows, maybe you can make it work, but it's going to be a challenge at this stage of the cycle.
No, just add to that, Stan, that anybody that I work with that's wanting to get into any business is what's your market in the end? I mean, we can all raise cows, but if you don't have a market, if you're planning on selling on the spot market, you're taking a chance. Not saying you can't make money, not at all. Like Stan said, if you got grass, because if any of us on this call could predict the future, we'd be having this meeting at face-to-face on the beach somewhere and we'd be paying the whole entire ticket. So, but it's, try to have a market in place and be certain that you can be successful.
That's a good point, Ted. The demand right now for high quality is incredible. With the cost of choice and prime meat in the store, the demand is still there. And quite frankly, primes are bringing, I saw today a market report, 25 to 30 cent premiums, in some cases 30-cent premiums for prime. Need to decide what type of cattle you're gonna have if you're gonna put together a herd, and which part of that market you're targeting. If it's a small operation and you're gonna try to market them as freezer beef, you better know what your clientele want. And if you're putting together groups of feeder calves, again, you better know what your clientele want. You better be able to put together the calves that can make that market. Right now, the demand for high quality is just incredible. And it's been that way for a year or two, right through the pandemic. And it doesn't seem to be any slowing down in sight with that demand.
The other thing I'll throw in there is that OSU does have budgets for different beef cattle things, and I know they've been working on updating some of those. So those can help you at least figure out some of the other costs that you may not have thought about when you're looking at putting an operation together. So if OSUs aren't ready, there certainly are other universities that you can go to.
Yeah, I think certainly a lot of things go into that. Just having cows is one thing. Managing cows, having facilities, I think having infrastructure in place to be successful, certainly part of that equation as well. And I think that rolls in pretty nice into a question that was asked up at that always judging contest in Worcester there a couple of weeks ago is, and I didn't send this one to you fellas beforehand, but we're going to ask it anyway. How do we get young operators to be part of the beef industry in this state specifically? Right. We know that the cow numbers aren't out there. It's dry in the West. Fortunately, some excess moisture is probably better than not enough. But we also know that we have an aging farm population. So that was a loaded question asked a couple of weeks ago that can be answered a variety of ways.
Let me offer a response that might not be the most popular one, but I've heard those types of questions for years. What are we going to do because the average age of the farmer is getting older? And oh my gosh, what are we going to do? I contend that supply and demand will take care of that problem. I don't think we need to go look for farmers of a certain age. I don't think we have to worry about finding replacements. When the income opportunities are great enough, we will have people that will fill that niche. It's like when they talk about row crops and what are we going to do with the average age is getting older? We got to have a younger generation to take this over. There's not a spare acre anywhere around that's not being farmed. It doesn't matter how old you are. And it's going to be the same way with the beef cattle industry, in my humble opinion. When the income opportunities are there, there will be people taking care of them. Got some good friends, Garth, that saw income opportunities with sheep. We aren't worried about what are we going to do if we don't have enough sheep producers. The profitability coaxes the folks that want to do that into the business. And if there's not enough supply, then the market will get greater. It's like we talked a minute ago about the demand for high choice and prime beef. They will keep raising the price until we produce what the demand asks for. And it'll be the same way, in my opinion, with folks doing the farming. We will find ways. I've heard since I was a youngin', still in high school, that there wasn't a lot of future in this industry for me. There is. I don't think we have to worry about the age of folks. We'll get it done.
Anyone else want to take a swing at that one?
I've heard a lot of some of our economists, and it's, I mean, us old crusties look at the new generation coming up differently. I mean, our parents looked at us like we were nuts, rightfully so in my case, but they're, like Stan said, they're going to get it done. They're just going to do it a little bit differently than what we did. They look at things differently, little different values than what we have, the way we grow up. But I agree with Stan. I mean, the dollar bill has driven everything and it'll continue to drive it. It's just things will be done a little bit different.
Several good points. That conversation was spurred by Ashland County Farm selling for almost $18,000 an acre. Just a couple of days before that.
I'll just throw in there, Garth, that it's easy to buy something. It's something else to pay for it. So the market will take care of it. We just got to let it happen.
I kind of exhausted the questions that we had in the can. Anybody that's logged on this evening have any questions they'd like to ask? I can either unmute you if you raise your hand, or go ahead and type those into the Q&A box. Until we see something pop up, I guess. Been a lot of comments lately about calving issues, calf mortality in these young calves less than a month of age. Stan, you want to share some of the resources we have available to that regard?
Yeah, and I'll preface it by saying that I guess as we address those issues, and as I visited with a fellow today who said he was having trouble with calves, what size are the calves? Are they all the same? Is it birthing issues? Is it high birth weight issues? Is it calves that are going along for a bit and then getting scours and dehydrating and dying from that? So as we address the different issues, but the fact is we've got a number of resources, and most of them are on YouTube videos that we've gathered up from over the years of doing beef schools. And so I would encourage folks, I'm going to put that link here. I think I got the right one. Link to our YouTube channel in the chat. And even a couple of the ones we've already asked, we've pulled out some little segments of those presentations and parts and pieces. One of the ones from 3 years ago that you're not going to find at the top of that list, but go back to 2019 as those videos are listed in chronological order. And Dr. Kiefer did a real nice 30-minute presentation on calving issues and how to deal with calving issues for the person that can't decide when to pull a calf, or how to treat it once it's pulled, and those sorts of things. Go back to the winter of 2019. It's probably January or February as you look at the dates of those videos, and pull that one up. It's about 30, 35 minutes of real good stuff, down to earth, common sense type stuff. There's a couple of more recent ones that we've pulled out right at the very top. One of those is Dr. Kiefer talking about the core vaccines that he believes every cow herd should get. And also there's about 6 or 7, 8 minutes that we pulled out just focused on calf issues and what can we do to prevent health issues with calves. So other than going to the Beef Team newsletter website and using the search engine on the left And that search engine really does work nicely. Just push a concern in there and hit the return key, and you'll get a lot of our old issues. The other place to go is those YouTube videos. A lot of good information there in recent years, not only in full presentations, but also some parts and pieces that we pulled out in anywhere from 3 to 10, 15-minute segments.
Dr. Boyles.
Well, I haven't gotten this question, but the high feed prices. Yeah, I did a presentation on that, but it's gotten me to think about genetics. A question, if we stay at these high prices, I'm going to start looking harder at residual feed intake, EPDs, in sire summaries. Residual feed intake is, we can calculate the estimated intake that a bull will eat. If they eat below that estimate, that's a good thing. If they eat over that, that's a bad thing on high feed prices. The low, the residual feed intake, if they're gaining weight, but with less feed, obviously they're more efficient. And I think feed efficiency has been important before we had that sort of knowledge, and we're not going to solve this situation with high grain prices with genetics overnight, but I think breeders and commercial cow-calf producers, maybe you might start looking at that residual feed intake, EPD, in the future.
Very good point. But a couple programs on EPDs and genetics, and then this winter, and the one EPD that's kind of somewhat new, but maybe haven't been looked at quite as hard, at least in the Angus breed. Had a couple questions about that dollar energy EPD, which kind of goes along with what Dr. Boyles just mentioned. Just the caution there, when we, just like birth weight or anything else, when we start single trait selecting or put a heavy emphasis in the case of dollar energy, we might end up with, we can really work our way to a smaller cow herd pretty quick. Richard's got a question in the Q&A. A lot of calves that have been larger than normal lack interest to nurse. Seen it on his own farm. Could this be due to excess forage during the fall of 2021?
Some of those large calves result from stress during the winter. A lot of research suggests that if they're struggling to keep warm or they're struggling to keep dry, that their metabolism speeds up such that not only keeps their bodies warm and keeps them healthy, but also tends to make the calf just a little bit bigger. Some of the calf issues that relate to not being very aggressive with nursing or kind of lethargic when they're born, I think roll back to maybe how quickly they got out of the womb and on the ground. If it was a difficult birth, it's not uncommon for those calves to take longer to recover and to get up and nurse and that sort of thing. And then one thing leads to another. They're slow to get up and nurse, so they don't get colostrum or quite as much colostrum as they need early on. And of course, the ability to absorb the colostrum rapidly declines as time goes on, and by the end of 24 hours, it's almost impossible. So a lot of things going on. I don't know what you can do about that metabolism thing with a stressful winter, other than try to keep them dry, try to keep them in a windbreak. But I really don't think the high quality feed necessarily had a lot to do that, because I've seen a lot of big calves over the years and years where we didn't have very high quality feed. As Ted tracked hay quality over the years with some of the summarization that he's done, doesn't seem to have mattered a lot whether they were getting high quality feed or in some cases lesser quality. We still had that risk of big calves, and a lot of that had to do with maybe how stressful portions of the winter were.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Stan. I mean, it's number one. I mean, you know me, I'll hammer on forage quality, and if you don't know what you've got going into the winter, but I think a lot of it, if you're spring calves are typically normally heavier than fall calves. It's just the metabolism of that cow when it's cold in the winter, their circulation is greater because they're trying to stay warm. Whereas fall calving, you're in the hot weather, their circulation isn't as great because they don't need it for the body heat. So typically those calves are smaller. Why a lot of folks have went to that. Typically it's easier calving just because those calves are smaller. But yeah, I think a lot of it is the aggressiveness of that calf is how quick they got out. Every year is different, but we go from this 70 to 20 below, and it's just, you know, not good.
I'm glad you mentioned the fall calving thing, Ted. We talked earlier this evening about perhaps some folks being interested in starting a cow herd. I would challenge anybody that's in a place where they're starting or building back a herd to think seriously about fall calvers. The downside is the feed needs to be managed differently. But if you can manage the feed resources, there are so many opportunities with fall calvers. You've got the real good grass market for those calves in the spring if you want to sell them that way. You've got a little better cull cow market typically in the spring or late in the winter when those calves are being weaned and cows are being culled. You put yourself in a position where if you want to work with a spring calving producer, you can divide your bull power, the cost of your bull power in half and use them twice as much during the year and not be housing a bull all the time. The fall calver can use him when he needs him. The spring calver can use him when he needs him, and you can get twice as much good out of those high quality cows. The birth weight thing is real. And Ted, you're exactly right. You don't see the large calving issues in the fall that you might see from the exact same cow and exact same mating in the spring. And of course, the calving season, as long as you're past the time of fly strike or you got mamas that are aggressive enough to get those calves licked off before the flies can strike, if they're coming maybe in August when there's still a lot of flies around. But if you get past that, you're calving in very nice conditions, very seldom mud, very seldom cold issues. And you're also not trying to breed cows in the heat of the summer. I think folks that have gone to fall calving are finding that they can keep that birthing window a lot tighter because we're breeding about Thanksgiving time and we're not into, miss the first cycle on a spring calving herd, and you might be into the heat of July very quickly trying to get cows bred. And I think you'll find that you get them settled more quickly in the fall. So if you can manage the feed situation for those fall calvers, there's a lot of opportunities there that I would challenge folks to look seriously at.
Yeah, Stan, that's what I was just going to say. It's whether it's pasture quality or forage quality feeding in the winter. If you're going into fall calving, then I think it takes a little more feed, or at least better feed, because those calves are nursing on the cows and they're not grazing. You're feeding unless you've got a pretty good stockpiled system or some residue that you're grazing off. Every system has its ups and downs, but I think you look at the market and there's some real opportunities there in fall calvers.
To go along with Ted, the fall calving and the hay management, I've been fall calving for 20 some years now, and I really like it, but it really brings out the importance of doing your forage testing so you know what kind of quality of hay you're feeding those cows, because it makes a big difference on how they come through the winter and how those calves grow.
Yeah, I've always wondered this probably ain't the year to experiment with high feed prices. What if we took those fall calving cows and early weaned those calves and looked at maybe kind of an unconventional system, get that energy demand off those cows and just kind of manage those calves along till this time of year when seasonally we know that, 5-weight calves are going to sell for their greatest per pound unit in March and April, and call cows are going to be high in February and March. And I think if we look at that entire system, it's definitely worth consideration.
Well, I think early weaning of Garth would be good, but again, what market you going to? If you're going to the backgrounders, they're going to turn them out on grass. They don't want them tick fat to put them out on grass. They want them lean and mean to put them on grass. But if you're going right to a feedlot with them, absolutely.
Yeah, I think how you manage those calves from January 1st till middle of March for that grass market would certainly be key. I guess I have a question for those of you online. As we think about, we're always seeking input and evaluation on programs. This winter we did kind of some hybrid approach with feedlot school, these monthly webinars. We were in Brown County for an in-person cow-calf program. Coming out of COVID, I think there's still a lot of unknowns as to what that magic combination of teaching and extension education looks like. I guess what format do you folks prefer, and are there any topics that we need to hit on going into this summer and next fall? Do you want to use the chat box there?
While we're waiting on that, Garth, I'll bring Steve back into the conversation. Since there was a question on minerals there, Steve, maybe talk a little bit, because I get questions every once in a while on the chelated or the organic minerals, along with the vitamin program. I know probably vitamin A is probably the biggest one that goes into a mineral, as long as it's got a good stabilizer with it. But yes, they have different costs, but maybe just touch on that for the folks that are on, to let them know about those differences.
I'd be glad to. And Stan, there is that video that Garth and I did on minerals and talked on that. Maybe you could share that link if you have time there, but I'll kind of do some things there. Chelated minerals, I really like in times of stress. When I've got cattle coming in into the feed yard that have been stressed, I'm going to look at using some chelated minerals. What is a chelated mineral? That's a mineral that is hooked onto an amino acid or maybe a carbohydrate, and it goes into the body of these cattle, but it stays in the body longer. If there's a system that wants to get a hold of it. Now, typically these minerals are more expensive than are the non-chelated. There's zinc oxide, a very good source of zinc, but it is not as, call it digestible, as zinc methionine. So I like to use zinc methionine when I've got some receiving cattle, or if I've got feet and leg problems, I'm going to maybe jack up the zinc levels. Actually, I can actually increase marbling if I've got deficient zinc, and I'm going to go that route. Now, that old beef cow in September, she's weaned off a calf. Does she need a chelated mineral? I don't think so. If she looks okay, we can get by with some of our cheaper minerals. So it's a combination. Maybe breeding time. There is a time to maybe use some higher priced products like that. You could also talk about probiotics. I'm thinking about probiotics when I got those calves coming in and they're highly stressed. I might well use some sort of yeast product, something like that in that mineral to get those cattle up on feed. I don't know that I need those all the time, but I think in terms of times of stress or of a severe deficiency, I'm going to go with some of those mineral sources that are much more digestible, have a higher utilization at that time.
Dr. Boyles makes several good points, and tried to make this point. We had a kind of a new extension educator training last week. Right. Anytime we talk about forages, certainly need to have minerals and high quality mineral program in that mix to meet the needs of those cattle. Steve, in the Q&A, Bev asked about zinc for feet problems. What kind of problems? Seen a lot of feet injuries with some of the wet conditions this spring.
Yeah, and it's not a catch-all for those situations. I see it more often in the feedlot situation. If I've got some cattle going down, I'm going to start looking hard at the zinc. That helps make the hoof harder. But going back, if there's been mud all over the place that you've had, I'm sorry, I can't tell you that we're going to jack up the zinc and solve the problem. That's fighting nature. That needs to be, we need to maybe move the place where we're feeding our cattle. It may be said, well, that's where I always feed my cattle. Well, it's always very muddy. Maybe we need to move things around or find a way to get that environment improved where those cattle are living. So it's not, oh, I can feed something and fix it. Now we're going to look at that in those cattle. If they've got some foot issues, yeah, let's look at the zinc level that you've got with those cattle in the mineral, that choice mineral. But at the same time, we're going to look at where they're being fed and see if we can improve that situation, especially for those cows that are slopping around in mud all the time.
Seeing some comments in the chat about kind of a beginning farmer program, boot camp type of thing. That's something we're working on. Something that we can replicate across the state of program. I'm working with our small ruminant specialist, Dr. Brady Campbell, to kind of put together that small beginning farmer beef and sheep program where we can cover forages, we can cover facilities, animal handling, and just basic management. And Christine's answering some questions about calving, about the cow-calf simulator. Certainly we do have that one there at Bell Valley that she kind of manages. Then occasionally we do have a couple more of those in the system that we can get out across the state. Some programming to identify foot problems, how to physically treat them without a table using squeeze shoot. Yeah, maybe we get Dr. Kiefer on tap for that. He's probably the one that needs to address any of those animal health specific type questions. Very good suggestion.
And I just throw out there, Garth, that I know Julie, you're down in Logan, but if there's a beef producer that's in your area, there are a few folks that are willing to work with you. Maybe find a producer that's looking at getting out and you come in and take their herd over. I mean, I'd love to establish that mentoring program. Just a lot of logistics to work through there, but it would be great to get folks with your energy to come in, and these folks provide the cows and the facilities and you take over the operation and run it for them. I think that would be fantastic. But yeah, we've got other options out there too. Some of these medical issues, they've got to be addressed by a veterinarian. There's only so much that we can put out there just because there's so many variables out there that what looks like one thing a lot of times isn't. So we just got to be really cautious there on how we proceed with some of those issues.
Yeah, anytime we have a program, we talk about the resources available at our website, beef.osu.edu. If you're not subscribing to that weekly newsletter and keeping in tune with things, whether it's programs or just timely information, I certainly encourage you to do that. Stan does a great job sourcing some timely articles from all over the country. As far as content, what's happening in Kentucky is usually pretty applicable to what's happening here in Ohio, and same thing across the country. And then the other part of that's that events page. Whether it's these webinars, field days, beef quality assurance, all those different resources are at beef.osu.edu. And one of those field days resource kind of events that I think will be of interest to several folks across the state. If I can find the right folder here. It's been a while since we've had kind of a statewide beef field day. We've been working to get that put together. We're going to be in Muskingum County, July 16th. I believe that Saturday is the date. We'll share a link to this if you can see that there. We're going to be in Muskingum County, July 16th. We're going to visit a pretty sizable feedlot, talk about some of those health challenges with receiving cattle, preconditioning, vaccines. You're going to visit a local meat processor to talk about what we've seen during COVID. What are the legal do's and don'ts with direct marketing meats? And then we're going to visit a cow-calf operation. These guys build commercial fence, agricultural fence on the side, run about 200 cows. Pretty neat operation if we think about how they utilize fall calving and farm succession planning as they transfer a lot of that management from the father to the son with regards to that cow operation. Dr. Kiefer's going to be back talking about vaccinations, and we'll kind of wrap things up. This is on the events page. There's a registration link there where you can contact, I think, the Muskingum County Extension Office. Any other questions? Ted, Dean, Steve, anything that we might have glossed over this winter that we need to cover? Current issues type of things?
As fast as everything's turning, I don't know that we can keep up with everything, but we try. I'll just say one comment, and it sounds like we got a couple folks that are beginning into this. My only caution is that a lot of times when folks get into animal agriculture, it's still as much an art as it is a science. But these animals are a lot tougher than we give them credit. They were around a lot longer before we came around a lot of times, and they survived just fine. Too many times we create our own problems by taking too good a care of them. So just keep that in mind, but wherever you're at, find a local producer. There's one out there that'd be willing to help and share with you. Not every one of them. Farmers are really an independent group and always will be, I hope. But there's opportunities out there. You just got to keep looking.
And Ted, we might be able to facilitate some of that relationship building. I don't know what county everybody's from, but certainly if you're in that Perry County area, shoot Ted an email. And I think we can help make some of those connections with some of our more progressive producers in the counties. I guess as we kind of wrap things up, feel free to continue to ask questions if you have them. And the last couple of years during the summer and into the fall, I keep going back. There's a reason we've had an Outlook webinar the last couple of years. COVID was tough to predict and what was going to happen there in terms of everybody's two favorite words now, supply chain and those type of things. I would go back and reference that webinar as you look at making management decisions. Reference the weekly beef letter. Like I said, the folks from Kentucky and our friends of the South do a great job putting kind of market update things in there. I think that's something we can't talk about enough is dollars and cents and how management practices influence the value of the calves, the cattle that we market on a daily basis, right? We talk about facilities. I think facilities and economics go hand in hand, right? Because if we can make some management decisions that add value to calves, add value to fed cattle, there's increased potential to be profitable in this business. We know inputs are going to be high, right? Feed, fertilizer, seed, it's all higher or as high as it's ever been. So think about those management decisions, you know, that have the potential to increase profit.
I'll just throw into that with everything we've discussed tonight, we haven't went into a whole lot of depth on things, but we've got several people that seem to be new to the beef industry, and we've mentioned some of the YouTube videos that Stan has on the Beef Team website. They cover a wide range of topics and have some really good information. There's a lot of written information too that you can access on there, but definitely go to that Beef Team website. If you just Google Ohio State Beef Team, it'll be the first thing that pops up, and go to the resources on there.
Absolutely. You know, we recognize that sometimes listening to YouTube videos a lot handier if you're in the tractor or the truck, or, you know, as long as you're doing it safely than trying to read an article. You know, I guess we had a discussion at Beef Expo, and this might be the year to optimize versus maximize. I thought that was an interesting thought as we look at costs and current things in the market. Stan, any final thoughts? Don't tell me for once Stan Smith's lost for words.
No, I think we're good.
You know, well, if there's no other questions, you know, and kind of circling back to one of those we had, it's probably a great time to be in the beef business. I think there's a lot of decisions you got to make as you start into this process. You know, consider economics, consider management. What can you do reasonably? That's, you know, a financially sound decision. And hopefully you have a successful 2022. Like I said, we'll be around different field days, different pasture walks this summer. I think some point I'm on a schedule with about everybody on the panel here this evening. And always, you know, don't be afraid to reach out. Steve and I are pretty easy to get a hold of. My email is ruff.72@osu.edu. If I can get the phone in the office figured out, we'll certainly pick it up. Technology we still struggle with at times, but that's all I think we've got for this evening. Appreciate you logging on. Once again, we'll be in touch and probably do something very similar to this as we look at winter, kind of January through April again, going forward.